Alright, so I'm Becca, as you probably know, and I'm going to be covering some of the basics to Photoshop and some of the key things to understanding how to edit photos, as well as some things that it's good to have background knowledge on before going into any photo editing software. The things I'll be covering mainly in this tutorial are the tools off to the side here and the tabs appear. I won't be going into every detail into things like help. Of course, you don't need to know that. But I will be talking about things like file and edit an image, because those properties of these top toolbar here is insanely important when it comes to photo editing. So the first things first is that we're going to need a canvas to work in, and with that we're going to go up to File, hit New, and you're going to see this little window pop up. Hold on, it's on my other desktop. This is what my window shows up when it comes to it. It depends on your version of Photoshop. You might have an older one, but this is the standard for most Photoshops today. So my canvas right now is 2048 by 1152, which is pretty big actually, since we're in pixels right now. If you put it to inches, it's easier to understand. It's 6 by 3, which is an odd dimension. It might be because I have something copy-pasted on my desktop or whatever. So first things first, we're going to want to put it in a power of 2. Powers of 2s are pretty important when it comes to resolutions and projecting things on a screen. Like these powers of 2 are like 2, 4, 8, 6, 32, but the main ones we're going to be probably working in are 256, 512, 1024, and 2048. This isn't the size of most standard desktops. Most standard desktops are not that size. They are 1080 by 920, which is not a power of 2, but for the purpose of projecting it to the dome, we need to have our window in one of these resolutions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my res in pixels. Those values are in pixels. I wouldn't recommend working in inches or centimeters or whatever the Photoshop has to offer, simply because you're not exactly working with printing stuff. That's more important when it comes to things like art and editing when you're uploading or working with anything. Pixels is the easiest. I will recommend pixels. So I'm going to put mine in 2048 by 1024 because that is the easiest sort of dimensions that we're going to have here. Important to understand what resolution means. When your resolution is higher, that means when you zoom in more, your pixels won't be as blurry. So for example, I'll create a canvas that has resolution 300, and we'll work with this. It's pretty wide actually. So for example, I'll just go quickly now and I'll put down a brush. So this is working in 300 res, and as we zoom in, you can see the pixel quality is pretty clear for the most part, so like everything's fine. But say if we were to work in a canvas in 72 res, 72 res drastically changes the resolution of the canvas, which means that when you zoom into these pixels, they're going to be a lot blurrier. Your canvas as a whole will be a lot smaller and a lot blurrier as you zoom in. A recommended resolution for me would be 300 when it comes to things like printing off like pictures or artwork and stuff like that, but I would say that a comfortable medium in this area would probably be 150 to 300. You can work in 72. It's completely up to you whether you want to work in 72 or not. I've always been somebody that recommends higher resolution canvases so that your pictures come out a lot nicer. Now, if you're editing a photo, for example, your resolution will get distorted if you try to change it. So if it is in 72, which is the default for most images you'll find off Google, I would leave it like that. If you change it, if you're going to change a canvas, so say if it's like 500 by 500 pixels, I would recommend going it down because if you go up, that means that your canvas is going to end up blurry because you'll be stretching the pixels out. These pixels are pretty important when it comes to clarity of your photo, and if it's definitely in 72, do not stretch up your photo. So it would probably be important to understand some of the tools that we have over on the side here, because without them we can't edit photos at all. Okay, so the very basic first tool on our sidebar here is the move tool, or the select tool. Now there's nothing actually in the canvas for us to select, so it might be important for us to lay something down first. So I have this image of Carl that I'll be using for our demonstration purposes today, and I'll be editing it and showing you some pretty useful tips when it comes to photo editing. This was just the best example I could use. First things first, before you can edit your default image after you've opened it in Photoshop, it is important to come over to the toolbar over here. Now yours might look a little different. My Photoshop is customized to how I use it, but to find it, it'd be under Window, and you have to go to make sure Layers is actually visible. My Layers is over here. Your layers might, I think, default in Photoshop lies somewhere in the middle here. Mine's down here. First things first, you're going to notice that there's a little lock on this canvas. If you just click it, it should unlock it. It might pop up with a window telling you that, are you sure you want to unlock this? This is the background layer, such and such. It just automatically locks your background, so that means it won't like have any errors with it or won't get distorted or anything like that. That's these tools up here, which I don't think I need to go into. I'll cover maybe one or two. So first things first, now that our canvas is unlocked, it is free to edit. If you don't do that, it won't be free to edit, so make sure you go over there and unlock it, as I said. So now what we have here is now we are able to actually edit our photo. Our photo here is normal, so if we click over here on our first tool and then we click the picture, it'll automatically select this picture. Photoshop by default does not have transform controls on. I know in the Windows version of Photoshop it has a little check bar here to show transformation controls, which is these little boxes around here that allow us to edit it. If I turn those off, you won't see them. Basically, this whole purpose is to actually be able to edit it, so now we can freely move this around. When it comes to selecting, helpful tips include, if you want to keep the canvas the same size after you resize it, if you hold shift, it'll stay the same size no matter what. Control does a little bit of a wonk weird thing where it tilts it automatically. The pink lines that you keep seeing every time I line up the canvas are guidelines when it comes to photo editing. The pink lines right now display our images that it's in the center, both horizontally and vertically. So our picture is good. Once your photo is edited or resized how you want it to be, you're going to have to come up here and hit this little check bar before it'll go anywhere. If you want specific dimension changes to the pixel up, these are the options up here that they have for you. This includes rotation. This tool it basically opens up this little grid, and you'll be able to kind of swerve it around on almost like a 3D sort of platform to edit your photos on. I'm going to keep Carl the same. The next tool on the list is the selection tool. This is default just normal selection tool. There are a couple different selection tools that we have in the terms of shapes. The default one is the square, and the square basically is a selection tool that kind of allows us to play around with the background here. That's basically it. The same thing applies to this. Is just a simple old thing that automatically pulls up a bar. Something to keep in mind when it comes to when I'm going over the selection tools are the shortcut keys to make your life a lot easier. One of these include the handy dandy shift key once again. The shift key will automatically put your selection into a perfect square or a perfect circle if I go to the elliptical one. So say now it is a perfect circle rather than a distorted oval or whatever. You might also notice that when you pop up, it shows you the width and the height of the circle, which might be helpful when it comes to editing your photos if you want them exactly a certain way. So going to the next tool, we have the Lasso Tool, which is another selection tool. However, it is a free-form selection tool. So say if we select an area here, which is basically done by just clicking your mouse, if we hold Shift, it'll give us the option to add an additional part to our selection, which is important if, say, you forgot something or if you're doing very precise work. You can also remove it by holding, on Windows, it's Alt. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's the same thing on Mac. It's just not called Alt. It has a little text. But Alt basically removes a selection that you want, so now you can get this weird selection off Carl. In this tool, we have this is the one that automatically puts your freeform selection into straight lines, which is helpful when you want to carve out very specific dimensions. And to finish it off, you do have to connect it. The last one is this one. It automatically shapes to your photo, which is kind of really nice when it comes to photo editing. So for example, if I were to connect this, say if I wanted just his arm, which is kind of odd, but we're going to get just his arm because this tool is magic. So say if we wanted to connect it again, it's going to get a little wonky. This tool isn't the one I actually recommend when it comes to doing photo work like this. Okay, so the next tool on the list is the quick selection tool, which is the one I do recommend using. So with this tool selected, you have this little circle that comes up, and basically all you do is you click and you drag your areas that you want to have selected, which is pretty nice. If you have you can also resize your brush, so say if you don't want to click as much, it's easy as that. With this tool, it could overlap areas that you want, and that's where you go in and you hold Shift, or not Shift, to add things, or Alt to remove sections. You can, by resizing the brush, it gets the pixels more, like, refined, so your areas of selection won't be as drastic big as this, and it'll take up space that you don't want. Some of the very, very important tools when it comes to selecting your images are some of the shortcut keys that I recommend using. So, or Control or Command are going to be your best friend basically through all of these things. So say if we have something selected, if you hit Control D, it automatically deselects it. If you hit Control A, it automatically selects the entire thing. Keep in mind you can swap out Control for Command on the Mac, but this is going to be on Windows, so I'm going to say Control more than I'm going to say Command. So those are your best friends, and a Shift, Control, and Alt combined with keys is definitely where you want to go. The next tool is the crop tool, which we can basically just crop our image like any standard photo editing. The next is the Eyedropper, which comes to when you want to select your color. It'll go over any single area that you want to have. So say if you want to, I don't know, put them in a blue background, we could very well do that. If I grab my pen. So now we can put Carl in a blue only background if we wanted to. Yeah, that looks nice. So the next tool is the spot healing brush. These brushes are basically your key to making like magazine looking photos. So say if we want, we're going to zoom in. Control plus and Control minus are your shortcut keys to zooming in and out. So say if we want to get rid of his freckle over here, what we can do is we can take this tool, which I have the patch one selected, the patch tool. The spot healing one is the first one, so I guess I'll show you that one. Basically, if I go over this, it'll automatically cover up any like blemishes and stuff like that. That's helpful in some ways. The patch one is kind of helpful where you can select the tool and then drag it to an area you want it to look like, and it'll do the same thing. Those are the two I'll probably go over. These other ones, content aware move ones, are very weird. You don't want to use that one. The next one is the brush tool, which is helpful if you were actually drawing something, but right now I don't foresee you probably having to use this since we're mainly talking about Photoshop when it comes to photo editing, so we'll just leave that at that for now. It's pretty straightforward. All you do is you select the brush up here that you want to draw with, and you can draw with it. I have a pen, so there's pen pressure, sensitivity, because I'm using a tablet, but you won't get it. You'll get what a mouse gives you, which is this mess. Not very that important. Stamp, you probably won't use the tool at all. It's mainly used for cloning and stamping, which isn't useful almost 100% of the time. This is when it comes to working with your brushes. This gives you a history of your brushes, which, say if you're working on a piece of art and you change your brushes a lot and you need to go back to a brush that you used earlier, that's how you can do it. You open this, it'll give you brushes. The eraser is the best friend to the pencil, where it basically erases your canvas. Gradient tool is helpful in some regards. All of this mainly comes to when you're working in like art or anything. So say if you want to add a nice sick gradient to your picture, you can go ahead by doing that. The blur tool is the blur tool. It takes your picture and it blurs it. It's helpful if you want to edit out backgrounds and add sort of that fancy effect to your Instagram photos. You could do it this way by promptly selecting the background and blurring it out. There's also an easier way to do that, which I will get to in a bit. The dodge tool you probably won't use. It basically lightens your photo. It's mainly, again, for adding filters and effects to like skin tones and stuff like that. It adds a later thing. When getting into filters, it's important to go on its own tutorial. It's a more advanced sort of practice in Photoshop that takes a lot of sort of playing around, understanding, and kind of getting used to everything. It would be a long video if I included filters. Next, we have this little pen tool. This is for like very, very specific outlining. It's a whole nother mess on its own. You probably won't use it, so I'm not going to go into it. Text tool is very nice. It's basically like your everyday standard text tool. So say if you type something in it, you get the text. And it comes over here as a text layer, which is different from a normal layer. And with the text layer, you can resize it as well as basically anything. It's up to you what you want to do. So there's that. The next tool is this little, it's just the mouse. It's helpful when it works with this pen tool here, which you probably won't be using, so this won't be that helpful either. This is the rectangle tool, so say if you want to add some fancy geometric shapes to your picture, you can. It's very good for like comic work when you're working with like boxes and all this other stuff, and that's when you'd probably use it. This is the rotate tool. Again, you probably won't use this in photo editing unless you're using a pen. It's easy to understand the importance of flipping your canvas when it comes to working in general. That's basically all it does, and then resets it. Your zoom in and your zoom out. I mentioned these important shortcut keys already. They're Control minus and plus in case you missed them, and then Control 0 resets your zoom. So say if we zoom in, hit Control 0, back out to the normal. When you zoom in, it's important to hit space if you want to move around on the canvas. These are just shortcut keys that you're probably going to use if you want to get into this. Alright, so we're back with Carl, and now we're going to go over the top bar up here. Some of the basics that we're going to probably be using in this. The first one is new, open, open as, save and save as, export, etc. New opens a new canvas, which we've already discussed. Open opens another canvas, and that's how you get that. Close closes the current canvas you're working on. Save is very important. Make sure you save your files, because if you don't, you're gonna lose them and Photoshop's gonna crash on you. Trust me, I've been there 1,000 times. The amount of work I've lost to Photoshop crashing has it's a trip. Never one I recommend either. So in Photoshop, there's a lot of properties that you're gonna have to save as. If you're not done working with your file, then save it as a PSD or a Photoshop file. If you are done with your file, you're going to either save as a JPEG or a PNG. I'm a PNG person. PNGs are important to save as because JPEGs can't have transparent properties, which means if you save a file that doesn't have a background, it's going to have a default black background. PNGs, on the other hand, they can have transparent backgrounds, so I think it's always safer to work in PNG rather than JPEG. So if you hit PNG, that's what you get. And then export is really only when you're editing videos in Photoshop, which is crazy to think that you can do, but you can do if your computer can handle Photoshop editing videos. Most can't. I wouldn't recommend it. You'd also do it if you're editing GIFs in Photoshop. Most of the time you're probably not going to be editing a GIF, but I'll go over it in a second anyways. Edit is basically all of the tools that will come up. Transform, this is what I mentioned earlier, but this is just the manual edit one to do. Here you can undo and go forward into your images. You can copy, you can paste, you can fill, you can distort it, all of that. Image is where all of the filters lie and where all of your things basically get really complicated. It's very complicated. Mode, you can change your modes, but this is only when it comes to things like printing and stuff like that. You can also rotate and change your canvas sizes in images, which is important. Image size changes the locked picture as a whole. Yeah, they changed your locked picture, which is basically sampling your res. It looks like this. So say if you were to change your size, so say if we wanted it in a power of 2, which we do need it in a power of 2, you can change it to this. And it'll automatically change both your width and your height, sort of like a proportion. That's how it does it. And your res, if you wanted to up your res, remember when I said that if your res is 72, your best bet is to cut your canvas rather than to enlarge it because of the pixel quality and blurriness of the photo. Always go down. So it's actually going to get smaller because I put it down. Okay, next is canvas size. Canvas size is sort of the same thing except it doesn't change it in a proportion. So say if I were to change this to 600, not a power of 2, but another res. It won't change the height, so it'll distort it. So it'll bring out the picture without changing the other one. That's the difference between image and canvas size. The rest of the stuff you probably won't use. Adjustments. Very, very complicated filters that have a lot of background. Just know that hue changes the color, black and white changes the black and white balance of a photo. There's a lot. Hue saturation is basically what you'll be working in if you want to change the color. The saturation is the level of like bright colors to grayscale. It's kind of like that. Hue is your color, and then it'll also change stuff like lightness, which is basically your light to dark scale. And then saturation, your color scale, hue, your actual colors. We'll leave Carl in this weird color for now. The next thing is layers, which layers have to do with your toolbar over here. So if you were to hit new, it would add a new layer. There's a lot of different types of layer, but you don't probably need to use them. Duplicate layer copies the layers. So say if I want 2 Carls, we have 2 Carls. This is helpful when it comes to editing. If you want to save your previous layer, you can do that. Layer style edits all of the filters. Your filters, again, are your complicated things that you'll go over and it requires its own video for, I won't get into it, a layer mask, vector mask. These are all key essentials to editing your colors and your, like, the colors of your pictures, which arguably is pretty important in photo editing. However, it is very complicated, and this is a basic Photoshop tutorial. So that's what these layer masks and these vector masks and clipping masks, they're all different types of things that should be explained elsewhere. Lock layers allows you to not change the layer. Flatten image gets rid of all your layers. So I have this hidden, so if I just hit OK, ta-da, it's back to being a flat image, which you need to unlock again. Type. You probably won't use this. This is all just for typing and editing text. By editing text, I don't mean like making brochures and stuff. I mean like large sample masses of text when it comes to the complicated dimensions and printmaking in comics. Select. This is basically the 3 or 4 tools I mentioned over here, except compressed into a tab. So the select, you can see these little shortcut keys that I already told you about. They're here too if you don't want to actually do this. So Control A selects all of it, Control D deselects all of it, reselects your previous selection, which is, and then inverse. Inverse is kind of complicated, so I'll go over it. So say if we want to, I don't know, select this circle. If we have this, if we hit inverse, it'll select, rather than the area inside the circle, the area outside the circle. Wow, I know, it's kind of magic. The next thing in here also has to do with layers and colors and filters. Which is crazy because it's not even under the filters tab, which is where everything gets really whack. So basically your filters are all your editing. Basically I would recommend to play around with your filters. Most of them are pretty straightforward. Pixelate, more pixely. Noise adds noise, which is kind of like the stuff on the TV where it makes that loud shh noise. That's what it is. That's what noise is. Distort distorts it. Blur is blurring it. Sharpen sharpens the image quality and the pixels overall. Stylize adds a bunch of weird stuff to it. Video is editing video, but you're not editing video. 3D, you won't use 3D, probably. It's basically, working at 3D in Photoshop will basically cause your computer to crash unless you have a NASA computer. Your view is basically what you have to see. It's like what you're looking at on the screen right now. So here we go, we can zoom in, zoom out, fit, which are the keyboard shortcuts I told you earlier. Control minus, Control plus, Control 0. If you automatically want to go to your print size, which is this is basically what it would look like printed in contrast to your actual screen. Next we have is the windows, which shows every single window that we have here. So timeline is basically if you're editing GIFs, this is where you're going to do it. Deselecting and selecting these window tabs basically show your layers and your windows and everything you have selected. So say I don't have history turned on, but if I want to turn history on, bam, there it is. Help is basically if you can't find something. I know Mac windows are pretty different when it comes to this tab. On Mac, there's actually a search bar. On Windows, there's not. So there's that. So the last thing that we have to discuss in this is basically our sidebar over here. This is if you want to edit your colors. This is where it would be, basically changing your colors, so yada yada yada. So this is editing and adding layers. This toolbar right here is your filters. Complicated stuff, I promise. So say if we want to add a new layer, we can just click this. I know on default I have it turned off to say, are you sure you want to add a new layer? New layer, new layer, new layer. Yes. And the same thing will happen if you want to delete a layer, which is this button right here. You just delete it. and it'll go away, and it'll say, are you sure? I have mine checked as, yes, I'm sure it's gonna go through, yada. These toolbars up here, this tiny one, is basically for changing and manipulating your layers. So this one locks it so it can't be edited, so if you want to manually lock your background layer again, there you go. Your brush basically locks it from being edited, so whatever's on there, you can still edit it, but you see, you can't use the brush because the brush layer is locked. That's what this brush is. This move locks it, which means you can't move it. You can't move this layer. When I did that, it automatically moved it. This layer, which is movable, that's why I did that. This lock thing can be pretty useful. So say if you would draw like a smiley face on here. If you lock this, quick tip, you can resize it, and then there you go. You can automatically rechange your thing by locking it, because it won't change what's there. It'll just change the properties of what's there. Actually, I should reword that. It doesn't add things to what's there. It changes what's there, in a sense. But it won't change from the smiley face. So I can make it a half green, half blue smiley face if I wanted to. And that's that. That's your layer, your filters, as I mentioned. This is your opacity, which is how bright it is. Your transparency, basically. Your fill is basically the same thing when it comes to these toolbars here. Back down to here, you have new, you have delete, you can add it to a folder, so say if you want to organize your stuff. Fancy stuff, I know. If you right click a layer, this is all your information, which is basically up in the layers tab that I've already gone through. You can change the colors. Blending options is something that opened on my other desktop, where you can change all of the different settings. It's all complicated stuff. If you want all of this stuff on on your poor layer, that's what it does. It adds all of these filters. Photoshop has so many filters. I guarantee you that you can get lost in just editing the filters and all that stuff. But that has been the basic rundown of Photoshop. Now, a lot of learning in Photoshop comes to the nitty-gritty, just you gotta sit down, understand it. But I taught you some of the basic tools that you'll need to understand, such as selection, the paintbrush tool, file editing, looking it up, finding it, editing, and the properties of what resolution is, as well as what pixels mean, and the basics to working in it. Just remember the things that I mentioned about resolution, the power of 2 sizes, which is important for projecting to the dome, because you need to have power of 2, 4, 16, the sizes you'll work in, 256, 512, 1024, or 2048. Those are the sizes I would recommend using, or you need to use. Use resolutions 72 to 300, but if you can, work in 100 to 150 for projects like these. If you're making the photo, if you're editing it, it's going to be in 72. Okay, now I'm just rambling at this point, but that has been my basic tutorial on Photoshop.